Hello and welcome. The weight of your sword feels different tonight. Not heavier, not lighter, but charged with something you cannot quite name. Perhaps it is the knowledge that countless hands have gripped similar hilts across decades of gaming tables, each one believing they held more than steel and dice rolls. They held an ideal, a promise, a contract written not in ink, but in the very fabric of what it means to be righteous in a world of moral shadows. Section 1. The Birth of the Holy Warrior. Long before the first character sheet bore the word Paladin in careful pencil marks, the concept already lived in the collective imagination of storytellers. You might trace the lineage back through centuries to the Paladins of Charlemagne's court, those legendary peers who served the Holy Roman Emperor with unwavering devotion. Roland, whose horn blast at Roncesvalles Pass became the stuff of epic poetry. Oliver, the voice of reason amid the chaos of battle. These were not merely warriors. They were symbols of something larger than themselves, embodiments of an ideal that transcended the mundane reality of medieval warfare. The Song of Roland painted them in colors both vibrant and tragic. Men who would rather die than compromise their sacred duty. This literary tradition, this crystallization of knightly virtue into legendary form, would eventually find its way into the basement where Gary Gygax and his friends gathered to roll dice and craft adventures. In the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, before the term class had fully solidified in the gaming lexicon, players chose between three basic archetypes: fighter, magic user, cleric. Simple distinctions that covered the fundamental fantasy roles. But something was missing. The game, as originally published in 1974, offered mechanical frameworks for combat and magic. Yet it lacked a class that truly captured the essence of the righteous warrior. The knight who fought not for gold or glory, but for a higher calling. Gary Gygax recognized this absence. He understood that players craved the opportunity to embody not just martial prowess, but moral certainty, to wield their weapons as instruments of cosmic justice rather than mere tools of violence. Supplement 1, Greyhawk, co-authored by Gary Gygax and Robert J. Kuntz and published in early March of 1975, changed everything. Within its 68 pages, nestled among expanded rules for new weapons and revised magic systems, appeared the Paladin class alongside the Thief. This was not a gentle introduction. This was a demanding, uncompromising vision of what it meant to be a holy warrior in a fantasy setting. You could not simply choose to be a paladin. You had to qualify. Your ability scores needed to meet stringent requirements: a strength of at least 12, an intelligence of at least 9, a wisdom of at least 13, and most crucially, a charisma of 17 or higher. These were not mere suggestions. They were gates that locked most characters out of the class entirely. In an era when ability scores were rolled 3d6 in order, with no rearrangement permitted at many tables, meeting these requirements bordered on miraculous. But the requirements went deeper than numbers on a sheet. You had to be lawful good, not lawful neutral, not neutral good, not even lawful good with occasional lapses. The alignment was absolute, carved in stone like a commandment from on high. One intentional evil act, one moment of moral compromise, and your paladin status vanished. You became a fighter, stripped of your divine gifts, left to contemplate your failure. This was not a class for the casual player, for the person who wanted to explore moral ambiguity or test ethical boundaries. This was a class for someone who wanted to commit fully and completely to being the hero the world needed. The powers granted to paladins reflected their exceptional nature. You could detect evil at will, simply by concentrating, sensing the moral corruption that lurked in hearts and hidden places. You became immune to disease, your holy purpose shielding your body from the rot and decay that afflicted lesser mortals. You could heal wounds through laying on hands, channeling divine energy to close cuts and mend broken bones. At higher levels, you gained the ability to cure disease in others, to turn undead like a cleric, and even to summon a special warhorse, a mount bonded to you through sacred connection. These abilities were not purchased through skill points or feats. They were inherent to your nature as a paladin, gifts from the cosmic forces that recognized your devotion. Yet with these powers came restrictions that shaped every aspect of play. You could own no more than 10 magic items, and only one of each type. Your possessions and treasure were strictly limited. You could retain only enough wealth to support yourself at a modest standard of living, with any excess going to your church or charitable causes. You could not hire more than a modest number of followers. You had to tithe to a religious institution. These were not optional guidelines. They were the price of your calling, the sacrifices that proved your commitment transcended personal ambition. The original Paladin also required you to engage with the game world on a deeper level. You needed to seek out and destroy evil wherever it manifested. You could not simply ignore injustice or turn away from suffering. Your oath bound you to action, to constant vigilance against the forces of darkness. This created a particular style of play, one where your character's moral compass drove the narrative forward, where you could not simply wait for adventures to find you, but had to actively pursue them. In those early days, certain now famous names began to emerge in gaming circles. The archetype was taking shape in home campaigns across the world. Players created their own legendary paladins, knights errant who who wandered dangerous lands, seeking wrongs to right and monsters to vanquish. These characters became focal points of their gaming groups, paragons whose actions set the moral tone for entire campaigns. The transition to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, with the Player's Handbook released in 1978, refined the Paladin further. The class gained more detailed mechanics, clearer explanations of its powers and limitations. The Dungeon Master's Guide provided additional context for running paladins in campaigns, discussing the challenges of maintaining lawful good alignment in a complex world. The paladin became not just a character class, but a philosophical statement about heroism, about the possibility of pure good existing in an imperfect world. Gary Gygax, in his writings and interviews, often discussed the paladin with a mixture of pride and wariness. He had created something powerful, a class that resonated deeply with players who wanted to be unambiguous heroes. But he also recognized the difficulties inherent in the concept. How does a paladin navigate a world where right and wrong are not always clear? What happens when two paladins, both serving good, disagree on the proper course of action? These questions did not have simple answers, and Gygax knew it. The paladin was designed to be challenging, to force players to think carefully about their choices and accept the consequences of their actions. The Holy Avenger, a longsword specifically crafted for paladins, became one of the most iconic magic items in the game. When wielded by a paladin, the sword granted additional powers, dispelling magic and protecting against evil. In the hands of anyone else, it was merely a good weapon. This item embodied the symbiosis between the paladin and their divine calling, a physical manifestation of the connection between mortal warrior and cosmic purpose. Early adventure modules began incorporating paladins into their narratives. These characters appeared as non-player characters who might aid the party or serve as examples of holy virtue. Some modules presented fallen paladins, tragic figures who had lost their way and now sought redemption or had embraced darkness entirely. These fallen warriors served as cautionary tales, reminders of how fragile the paladin's status truly was. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and everything could be lost. The relationship between paladins and their deities was never entirely clear in these early editions. Unlike clerics, who explicitly served specific gods and received their powers through that worship, paladins seemed to draw their abilities from a more abstract concept of cosmic good. Some dungeon masters required paladins to worship specific lawful good deities. Others allowed paladins to serve a more general ideal of righteousness. This ambiguity created space for different interpretations. For paladins who were deeply religious, and others who saw themselves as champions of abstract principles, rather than divine servants. Multiclassing presented another complication. In early editions, Paladins could not multiclass at all. You were a Paladin or you were not. There was no mixing your holy calling with other pursuits, no dabbling in magic user spells or rogue skills. This restriction reinforced the idea that being a Paladin was not merely a job or a role, but an all-consuming identity. Your entire being was dedicated to your oath, leaving no room for divided loyalties or conflicting interests. The social dynamics of having a Paladin in the party created interesting challenges. As a player, if you chose to play a Paladin, you became the group's moral compass, whether you wanted that role or not. Other characters might resent your inability to compromise, your insistence on confronting every evil you encountered. Thieves and assassins particularly chafed under the scrutiny of a Paladin companion, knowing that too many questionable actions might force the Paladin to take action against them. Some gaming groups thrived on this tension, using it to create compelling roleplay and dramatic confrontations. Others found it frustrating, preferring a more relaxed approach to alignment and morality. Dungeon masters faced their own challenges when Paladins entered their campaigns. How much should the world respond to the presence of such a paragon? Should villains fear Paladins, knowing that these holy warriors could detect their evil? Should common folk revere Paladins, offering aid and support? The answers varied from table to table, but the presence of a Paladin undeniably shifted the tone of a campaign, making it somewhat more heroic, somewhat more black and white in its moral dimensions. The literature surrounding Dungeons and Dragons in these early years often featured Paladins prominently. Dragon Magazine, the official publication of tactical studies rules, ran articles discussing Paladin tactics, exploring variant rules, and presenting new ways to incorporate these holy warriors into campaigns. Players wrote letters debating the finer points of Paladin conduct, arguing about whether certain actions constituted violations of the code or fell within acceptable bounds. These discussions revealed how deeply players engaged with the concept, how seriously they took the responsibility of playing a character held to such exacting standards. As the 1980s progressed, the Paladin solidified its place in fantasy gaming culture. The class appeared in video games inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, in novels set in various campaign worlds, in artwork that adorned module covers and rulebook pages. The image of the Paladin, armored in gleaming plate mail, wielding a holy sword, became shorthand for heroism itself. This visual and narrative iconography spread beyond Dungeons and Dragons into broader fantasy culture, influencing how people thought about righteous warriors across multiple media. The mechanical challenges of playing a Paladin in first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons were substantial. Your limited magic item slots meant making careful choices about equipment. Your inability to accumulate wealth meant you could never afford the best gear without divine intervention or generous benefactors. Your alignment restrictions meant constant vigilance, careful consideration of every action, every decision. Yet these limitations were precisely what made the Paladin compelling. You were not powerful because you had the best stats or the most magic items. You were powerful because you represented something pure in a corrupt world, because your very presence reminded others that good could triumph over evil, that honor and justice were not empty words, but principles worth fighting for, worth dying for. The first generation of Dungeons and Dragons players who chose Paladins shaped the class's identity in ways that persist to this day. They established traditions, created expectations, and demonstrated that a character bound by strict moral codes could be not just viable, but incredibly engaging to play. Their stories, told and retold at gaming tables, in convention halls, and in the pages of gaming magazines, became part of the Paladin's legend. Proof that restrictions could enhance rather than limit the gaming experience. Section 2. The Age of Refinement. The winds of change swept through the gaming world in 1989. Second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons arrived not as a revolution, but as an evolution, a refinement of concepts that had grown and matured over 15 years of play. For you, the Paladin player, this new edition brought both validation and expansion. The core concept remained intact, that sacred commitment to lawful good, that unwavering dedication to justice and righteousness. But the possibilities for how you might express that commitment multiplied in ways the original designers could never have imagined. The second edition Player's Handbook, released in 1989 as a 256-page hardcover book written by David Zeb Cook, presented the Paladin with greater clarity and nuance. The ability score requirements softened slightly. You still needed exceptional charisma, but the rigid hierarchies of the past gave way to more flexible character creation methods. The core powers remained: detect evil, immunity to disease, laying on hands, the ability to turn undead at higher levels, and that special warhorse that would come when you reached sufficient experience. Yet the presentation felt different, more integrated into a broader vision of heroic fantasy. The game designers understood that Paladins needed to fit into diverse campaign settings, from traditional medieval fantasies to exotic worlds with their own unique cultures and values. But the real transformation came not in the core rulebook, but in the supplements that followed. Second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons embraced modularity, offering optional rules and variant systems that allowed dungeon masters to customize their campaigns. The complete Paladin's Handbook, published in 1994 and written by Rick Swan, became a watershed moment for the class. This single sourcebook expanded the concept of the Paladin in directions that seemed impossible under the original design philosophy. Within its pages, you discovered Paladin kits, specialized variants that allowed you to play Paladins from different cultural backgrounds and traditions. The votary served a specific deity with single-minded devotion, gaining unique powers related to that god's portfolio. The errant wandered the land as a solitary hero, unattached to any order or institution, guided only by personal conviction. The divinate possessed enhanced powers of perception, able to sense supernatural phenomena and predict danger. The Chevalier embodied classical knightly virtue, emphasizing courtesy, honor, and chivalric conduct. The Equerry specialized in mounted combat and the care of animals. The Expatriate came from a distant land, bringing foreign customs and unfamiliar fighting techniques. The Ghost Hunter focused on battling undead and incorporeal threats. The Inquisitor investigated heresy and rooted out corruption within the church itself. The Militarist served in organized armies, leading troops in large-scale conflicts. The Skyrider bonded with flying mounts, patrolling from above. The Squire served an experienced Paladin master, learning through apprenticeship. The Wormslayer dedicated themselves entirely to hunting and destroying dragons. Additional kits like the Envoy, who served as a diplomatic representative, and the Magician, who focused on healing arts, rounded out the options. Each kit came with its own benefits, restrictions, and special requirements. Some kits changed your weapon proficiencies or armor allowances. Others modified your spell access or granted unique abilities unavailable to standard Paladins. The variety was staggering, and it fundamentally altered how you could conceptualize your character. You were no longer just a Paladin. You were a specific kind of Paladin, shaped by culture, training, and personal calling. The handbook also introduced variations on the standard Paladin for different campaign settings. In the Forgotten Realms, you might serve Torm, the loyal god of duty and courage, becoming a champion of his church and upholding his strict code of conduct. Or you might worship Tyr, the god of justice, dedicating yourself to fair judgment and righteous punishment of wrongdoers. Ilmater, the god of suffering and endurance, attracted Paladins who embraced self-sacrifice and compassion. In the Dragonlance setting, the Knights of Solamnia embodied the Paladin ideal across 3 distinct orders. The Knights of the Crown emphasized loyalty and obedience to authority. The Knights of the Sword focused on courage and heroic action. The Knights of the Rose, the highest order, mastered wisdom and justice. Each order had its own oath, its own traditions, its own place in Kryn's complex social structure. A knight typically progressed through the orders sequentially, first serving as a Knight of the Crown, then advancing to the sword, and finally, if deemed worthy, becoming a Knight of the Rose. Lord Soth, that tragic figure first introduced in the Dragonlance Chronicles novels written by Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman, became the template for understanding fallen paladins. Once a knight of Solamnia, Soth's tale of corruption, betrayal, and damnation illustrated the terrible consequences of breaking one's sacred oath. His story, told and retold across novels and game supplements, showed you exactly what was at stake. Soth did not fall through a single catastrophic choice, but through a series of small compromises, each one seemingly justified at the time, each one leading him further from the light. When he failed to prevent the cataclysm despite being given the opportunity by the gods, his wife Isolde cursed him as she died in the flames that consumed their keep. His transformation into a Death Knight, an undead abomination cursed to eternal torment, served as the ultimate cautionary tale. You could see in his fate what awaited any paladin who strayed from the path, who allowed personal desire to override sacred duty. But Lord Soth was not alone in the pantheon of famous paladins during this era. Sturm Brightblade, another character from the Dragonlance Chronicles, represented the paladin ideal in its purest form. Though he spent most of his life as a squire, never achieving full knighthood until shortly before his death, his unwavering dedication to the measure and the code became legendary. His sacrifice at the High Clerist's Tower, where he faced the blue dragon High Lord Kishiara in single combat to buy time for his companions, became one of the most iconic moments in Dragonlance history. His relationship with the measure, the rigid code governing Solamnic knights, illustrated the tension between law and personal conscience, between tradition and immediate need. Sturm followed the measure, even when it seemed to lead nowhere, even when others mocked his dedication to outdated rules. His vindication came not in his lifetime, but in how his example inspired others to hold fast to their principles. The rise of anti-paladins during this period added a dark mirror to the holy warrior tradition. These were not simply fallen paladins, but warriors who actively served evil with the same dedication paladins brought to serving good. Blackguards, as they were sometimes called, possessed twisted versions of paladin powers. They could detect good, sensing the presence of virtue so they might destroy it. They caused wounds rather than healing them. They commanded undead rather than turning them. They rode nightmares instead of celestial warhorses. The complete Paladin's Handbook devoted some attention to these dark warriors, not as player character options, but as antagonists, enemies who understood paladins intimately because they represented everything the Paladin opposed. The question of whether anti-Paladins represented a legitimate character class or merely villainous adversaries sparked heated debates in the gaming community. Some players argued that allowing anti-Paladin player characters undermined the Paladin's fundamental nature. If evil could be just as dedicated, just as noble in its own twisted way, then what made Paladins special? Others countered that anti-Paladins created opportunities for compelling storytelling, for complex moral narratives. The debate never reached complete resolution, but most groups settled on treating anti-Paladins as non-player character opponents rather than viable player choices. Multi-classing restrictions remained strict in 2nd edition, though the rules acknowledged certain exceptions for specific character races and combinations. Humans still could not multi-class as Paladins, preserving the class's singular focus and intense commitment. Demi-human Paladins, rare as they were, faced their own unique challenges. The handbook discussed the possibility of demi-Paladins, variant characters who shared some characteristics with Paladins, but remained distinctly different. Campaign settings beyond the established classics began developing their own Paladin traditions. In the Dark Sun setting, where traditional gods were absent and magic itself corrupted the world, Paladins seemed impossible. Yet even there, one could imagine characters who fought for justice without divine backing, who protected the innocent through sheer force of will and martial skill. The absence of traditional Paladin powers would make these characters no less dedicated, no less heroic. The Planescape setting, with its focus on cosmic philosophy and the nature of belief, offered Paladins new challenges and opportunities. You might serve the concept of law itself, embodying abstract principle rather than worshiping a specific deity. You might travel to the upper planes, meeting celestial beings who shared your commitment to good. You might visit the lower planes, confronting devils and demons in their own territories, bringing light to the darkest corners of the multiverse. The infinite nature of the planes meant your crusade need never end, that you could always find new evils to combat, new causes to champion. The Birthright setting introduced Paladins as potential rulers, characters who governed nations with the same moral clarity they brought to personal combat. You could be a Paladin king, balancing the demands of statecraft with your sacred obligations. The tension between pragmatic rule and absolute morality created fascinating role-playing opportunities. Could you tax your citizens to raise an army if some of that money might be spent on morally questionable purposes? Could you negotiate with evil nations if such diplomacy prevented war and saved innocent lives? These questions had no simple answers, and exploring them revealed new dimensions of the Paladin concept. Ravenloft, the Gothic horror setting presented perhaps the greatest challenge for paladins. In the demiplane of dread, where dark powers imprisoned souls and corrupted everything they touched, your righteousness became both weapon and vulnerability. You attracted the attention of Dark Lords, evil beings who saw your goodness as an affront or a prize to be corrupted. Your powers might function differently in different domains, subject to the whims of the realm's dark master. Yet paladins in Ravenloft also demonstrated that light could shine in darkness. That hope could persist even in the most hopeless circumstances. The novels published during the second edition era featured paladins prominently, helping to define the class in the popular imagination. These stories did more than simply entertain. They demonstrated how paladins functioned in narrative contexts, how their rigid codes could create both drama and inspiration. They showed paladins making difficult choices, facing temptation, struggling with doubt, yet ultimately remaining true to their calling. They illustrated that being a paladin did not mean being perfect or never making mistakes, but rather committing to rise again after every fall, to learn from errors and strive always toward the ideal. The art direction of second edition reinforced these narrative themes. Paladin illustrations showed diverse warriors from various cultural backgrounds, male and female, young and old, clad in armor styles ranging from European full plate to exotic designs inspired by Asian, African, and Middle Eastern traditions. The visual representation acknowledged that holiness was not confined to a single cultural expression, that righteousness could manifest in countless forms. Dragon Magazine continued to publish articles exploring paladin mechanics and philosophy throughout the second edition era. Writers proposed new powers, discussed ethical dilemmas, offered advice for both players and dungeon masters. One could imagine articles examining what happened when two paladins, both serving good, found themselves on opposite sides of a conflict. How should such a situation be resolved? Could both paladins be right? Such scenarios, while challenging, offered opportunities for profound role-playing, forcing players to articulate their characters' values and defend their positions through reasoned argument rather than combat. The code of conduct gained more detailed exposition during this period. You had to respect legitimate authority unless that authority commanded evil acts. You had to help those in need, provided doing so did not compromise your other obligations. You had to punish those who harmed or threatened innocents. You had to show mercy to opponents who surrendered, but you were not required to be foolish about it. You had to be truthful, though you need not volunteer information that would aid evil. These guidelines provided structure, while acknowledging that real situations were complex, that simple rules could not cover every circumstance. The relationship between paladins and churches evolved during 2nd edition. Earlier editions had been vague about whether paladins required institutional affiliation. 2nd edition made it clearer that most paladins belonged to religious orders or served specific churches, though independent paladins remained possible. This connection to organized religion provided resources, training, and community, but it also created obligations and complications. You might receive orders from your church hierarchy that conflicted with your personal judgment. You might discover corruption within the institution you served. These tensions added depth to the Paladin experience, forcing you to navigate not just external evil, but the imperfections of supposedly righteous organizations. The economic restrictions on paladins also received more attention. You could not hoard wealth, but you needed enough resources to maintain your equipment, support your mount, and fund your crusade against evil. The complete Paladin's Handbook offered guidelines for managing these competing demands. You might establish a stronghold at higher levels, creating a base of operations and a refuge for those you protected. You might cultivate relationships with wealthy patrons who supported your work. You might rely on your religious order for material support. These practical considerations grounded the Paladin in the campaign world's economy, making you more than just a moral abstraction. Section 3. The Revolution of Choice. The year 2000 arrived with promises of a new millennium and a completely reimagined Dungeons and Dragons. 3rd edition, designed by Jonathan Tweet, Monty Cook, and Skip Williams, tore down the foundations and rebuilt them from scratch. Released in August of 2000, with the Player's Handbook debuting at Gen Con that year. This new edition represented a radical shift for the game. For you, standing at the threshold of this new era, with your Paladin's Oath still burning in your heart, the changes felt seismic. Everything you knew about how the game worked, how classes functioned, how power scaled with level, underwent radical transformation. The D20 system replaced the Baroque collection of different dice mechanics that had accumulated over decades. Skills became unified and standardized. Feats allowed customization in ways previous editions never permitted. And through it all, the Paladin emerged not weakened, but transformed, refined into something more mechanically coherent, while retaining that essential core of righteous dedication. The 3rd edition Player's Handbook presented a Paladin stripped down to essentials and rebuilt with elegant precision. Gone were the crushing ability score requirements that had locked most characters out of the class. You still needed charisma, but the prerequisites were reasonable, achievable without miraculous dice rolls. The alignment restriction remained absolute. Lawful good, no exceptions, no flexibility. One evil act and you fell, losing your Paladin powers until you atoned through a special spell. But everything else about how you functioned changed dramatically. Detect evil became an at-will ability, usable without limit, though it now required concentration and revealed information gradually rather than all at once. Your immunity to disease remained. Laying on hands healed a number of hit points based on your charisma modifier multiplied by your level, scaling smoothly as you advanced. You gained the ability to remove disease. You became immune to fear. Your divine grace added your charisma modifier to all saving throws, making you remarkably resilient against magical attacks and harmful effects. You could smite evil once per day initially, more often as you leveled, adding your charisma modifier to your attack roll and your paladin level to damage against evil creatures. You gained limited spellcasting ability starting at 4th level, drawing from a specific list of paladin spells. At 5th level, your special mount arrived, no longer simply a warhorse, but a magical companion bonded to you supernaturally, sharing your abilities and growing in power as you advanced. The mechanical elegance of 3rd edition Paladin design solved many problems that had plagued earlier versions. Your powers scaled automatically, with level eliminating confusion about when abilities improved. The feat system allowed you to customize your combat style, choosing whether to focus on mounted combat, 2-weapon fighting, archery, or defensive techniques. The skill system let you invest in abilities like diplomacy, sense motive, and knowledge religion, mechanically reinforcing your role as a holy warrior and moral exemplar. But 3rd edition's most revolutionary contribution to the Paladin experience came not in the core rulebook, but in the supplements that followed. Prestige classes, a completely new concept, allowed characters to specialize further after reaching 5th level or higher in their base class. You could remain a straightforward paladin through all 20 levels, or you could branch into prestige classes that represented specialized training, unique callings, or secret traditions. The Dungeon Master's Guide included several prestige classes available to any character who met the prerequisites. Others appeared in sourcebooks focused on specific themes or campaign settings. The Blackguard Prestige class, introduced in the Dungeon Master's Guide, finally gave mechanical structure to the anti-paladin concept that had lurked in previous editions. A blackguard was not simply an evil warrior, but a fallen champion, someone who had once served good, or at least neutrality, before embracing darkness. To become a blackguard, you needed levels in a base class, and you needed to deliberately commit evil acts to corrupt yourself through conscious choice. The blackguard gained abilities mirroring and inverting paladin powers. You detected good instead of evil. You smote good instead of evil. Your touch caused disease rather than curing it. You commanded undead rather than turning them. Your mount was a fiendish creature. The blackguard represented damnation made manifest, the path of fallen virtue leading to ultimate corruption. What made the blackguard prestige class compelling was its implicit narrative. You did not simply create a blackguard character at first level. You became a blackguard through your choices, through falling from grace or deliberately seeking dark power. This created opportunities for tragic character arcs, for players to explore what happened when good intentions twisted into evil outcomes. Some tables allowed redemption arcs, where blackguards sought to return to the light, to atone for their crimes and reclaim their lost righteousness. These stories, when handled thoughtfully, became some of the most emotionally powerful experiences the game could offer. Other prestige classes offered paths for paladins who remained true to their calling, but sought specialized training. Various source books introduced options like the Holy Liberator and the Fist of Raziel, which could be found in supplements focused on exalted content. These prestige classes meant you could build the exact type of paladin you envisioned. You might be a demon hunter, a liberator of the oppressed, a dragon slayer, a protector of the innocent, a champion of a specific deity, or a wandering knight errant. The mechanical support existed to make each of these concepts distinct and effective. 3rd edition also introduced multiclassing in a way that, theoretically, allowed paladins to combine levels in different classes. You could be a paladin fighter, or a paladin cleric, or even a paladin sorcerer if you could justify such unusual combinations. However, the alignment restrictions remained strict. If you committed acts that violated your code, you lost your paladin powers. The flexibility was more theoretical than practical for most paladins, who found that mixing classes rarely benefited them as much as staying pure. The Forgotten Realms campaign setting for 3rd edition presented Faerun's paladins in rich detail. Each major lawful good deity had associated paladin orders with distinct traditions and philosophies. Paladins of Torm emphasized loyalty and duty above all else, serving as bodyguards and protectors. Paladins of Tyr focused on justice and law, acting as judges and executors of righteous punishment. Paladins of Ilmater embraced suffering and self-sacrifice, enduring pain so others would not have to. Paladins of Helm stood eternal watch, guarding against threats both known and unknown. Each order had its own heraldry, its own fortress temples, its own place in the realm's complex religious landscape. Eberron, the new campaign setting introduced in 2004, revolutionized how you could think about paladins. In this world of pulp adventure and moral ambiguity, paladins served the Silver Flame, a divine force that had saved the world from demonic invasion. The Silver Flame itself was created when a paladin of Dal a Ra named Tira Myrn sacrificed herself alongside a Quattle in 299 year of the kingdom, merging with the flame to bind the overlord Belshazzar. But the Church of the Silver Flame was not a simple force for good. It had its own politics, its own corruption, its own dark history of inquisitions and persecution, including the Silver Crusade against lycanthropes that lasted nearly 50 years. You could be a paladin who served the pure ideal of the Silver Flame, fighting demons and protecting the innocent. Or you could be a paladin caught up in the Church's political machinations, forced to navigate institutional corruption while maintaining your personal integrity. Aberon demonstrated that paladins could exist in morally complex settings without losing their essential nature. The Book of Exalted Deeds, published in 2003, became the definitive 3rd edition sourcebook for playing good-aligned characters. It presented rules for sanctified characters, individuals who had undergone rituals and trials to become living embodiments of virtue. Paladin characters could pursue these paths, becoming more than merely lawful good, but actively sanctified, bearing physical marks of their dedication. The book also introduced the concept of vows, sacred oaths, that granted special powers in exchange for accepting additional restrictions. You might take a vow of poverty, renouncing all material possessions beyond the bare minimum, gaining spiritual power in compensation. You might swear a vow of peace, refusing to ever strike the first blow in combat, becoming supernaturally difficult to hit. You might pledge a vow of obedience, subordinating your will entirely to your religious order, gaining wisdom and insight through your absolute trust in divine guidance. These vows allowed you to intensify your paladin concept, to push the boundaries of dedication and sacrifice. They were not mandatory, and many players found them too restrictive. But for those who embraced them, vows provided mechanical rewards for role-playing choices that might otherwise seem foolish or self-defeating. You became mechanically stronger by accepting narratively significant limitations, creating a beautiful symmetry between story and system. The Complete Divine, released in 2004, expanded Paladin options further. It introduced variant class features, optional abilities you could select instead of standard Paladin powers. You might give up certain abilities to gain enhanced healing. You might trade standard features for different supernatural powers. These variants allowed customization without requiring prestige classes, keeping you as a pure paladin while still expressing individual character concepts. Unearthed Arcana, also published in 2004, presented variant base classes, including the Paladin of Freedom and the Paladin of Tyranny. The Paladin of Freedom was chaotic good, a dramatic departure from traditional Paladin design. You served liberty and individual rights, opposing oppression wherever it manifested. Your code required that you respect individual liberty, help those in need provided they did not use the help for lawful or evil ends, and punish those who threatened or curtailed personal liberty. The Paladin of tyranny served lawful evil, dominating others through iron discipline and cruel law. The code required respecting authority figures as long as they had strength to rule, acting with discipline, helping only those who maintained or improved your status, and punishing those who challenged authority. These variants acknowledged that the Paladin mechanical chassis could support different moral philosophies, that the basic structure of Holy Warrior could translate across alignments. The introduction of 3.5 edition in July of 2000 and 3 brought refinements to the Paladin without fundamentally changing the class. Some powers were clarified or slightly adjusted. The special mount rules received extensive revision, making these companions more survivable and useful. Feats were rebalanced. Skill points were redistributed, but the core Paladin experience remained consistent, proving that the 3rd edition design had gotten the fundamentals right. Pathfinder, announced in March of 2000, and 8 as a response to the upcoming 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, eventually became its own game system. Paizo Publishing took the 3.5 edition rules and refined them further, releasing the final Pathfinder role-playing game core rulebook on August 13th, 2000, and 9 at Gen Con Indy. Pathfinder Paladins gained additional abilities and features that made them more versatile and effective. You could channel energy like a cleric healing allies or harming undead. Your divine bond allowed you to choose between a special mount or a bonded weapon that you could temporarily enhance. Your mercies, special powers gained as you leveled, let you cure specific conditions when using laying on hands. Your auras provided benefits to nearby allies, making you a powerful support character in addition to a formidable combatant. Pathfinder also introduced archetypes, variant class features that worked similarly to 3.5's variant abilities, but were more extensively developed. The Hospitaller archetype focused on healing and protecting others. The Sacred Shield specialized in defense, using a shield to guard allies. The Warrior of the Holy Light channeled pure divine energy, giving up spellcasting for enhanced supernatural abilities. Each archetype represented a different Paladin tradition, a different way of serving the cause of righteousness. Throughout the 3rd edition and Pathfinder era, online communities debated Paladin philosophy endlessly. Forums discussed what constituted lawful good behavior in various scenarios. Players shared stories of Paladins who fell, and those who remained true despite overwhelming temptation. Dungeon masters asked for advice, about adjudicating difficult ethical situations. The conversations revealed how deeply the Paladin concept resonated, how much thought players put into portraying these characters authentically. The optimization culture that flourished during 3rd edition affected Paladins significantly. Theorycrafters analyzed the most effective feat chains, the best equipment combinations, the optimal prestige class progressions. Some of these optimized builds, like the mounted Paladin charging with a lance, became famous for their devastating effectiveness in combat. Others represented creative solutions to the Paladin's relatively limited spell list. The optimization discussions sometimes clashed with the Paladin's roleplay-focused nature, creating tension between mechanical efficiency and narrative authenticity. The redemption arc became a recognized story structure during this period. A fallen Paladin, whether player character or non-player character, could seek atonement through quests, sacrifices, and demonstrations of renewed commitment to good. The atonement spell provided a mechanical path back to grace, but dungeon masters often required more than just casting a spell. You might need to complete a dangerous quest, make amends to those you had harmed, or prove through actions that your change of heart was genuine. These redemption stories became some of the most memorable moments in campaigns, demonstrating that failure was not final, that even the fallen could rise again. Section 4. The Modern Sacred Oath. The controversy arrived swiftly in 2008. 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, designed by Rob Heinsu, Andy Collins, and James Wyatt with the Player's Handbook, first published in June of 2008, represented such a radical departure from previous editions that the community fractured. Some embraced the new streamlined approach, the focus on tactical combat and balanced party roles. Others rejected it entirely, clinging to 3.5 or migrating to Pathfinder. For you, the Paladin player watching these debates unfold, 4th edition presented a particularly stark transformation. The class you knew, with its strict codes and heavy consequences, had been reimagined as something more flexible, more forgiving, and to many minds, less distinctly Paladin. 4th edition Paladins retained the lawful good alignment requirement, but the consequences of violating your code softened dramatically. You no longer lost all your powers for a single transgression. Instead, alignment became more of a guideline, a general description of your character's moral outlook, rather than an absolute restriction enforced through mechanical punishment. The power structure changed completely. You became a defender, a role focused on protecting allies and controlling enemies through marking mechanics. When you challenged a foe using Divine Challenge as a minor action, that enemy suffered penalties for attacking anyone except you. Your Divine Challenge marked enemies, dealing 3 plus your charisma modifier in automatic radiant damage when they violated the mark by attacking someone other than you. Your divine sanction, built into certain attack powers, provided another complementary marking option. These mechanics made you an effective defender, but they felt fundamentally different from earlier editions. The power system replaced the spell-like abilities and supernatural features of previous editions. You selected at-will powers usable every round, encounter powers available once per combat, and daily powers representing your most potent abilities. These powers had names like Bolstering Strike, Radiant Smite, and Divine Bodyguard. They functioned more like martial techniques, enhanced by divine energy, than traditional paladin abilities. You still healed through laying on hands, but even this became a limited-use power rather than a scaling ability based on your level and charisma. The special mount disappeared entirely from the core paladin class. Divine Bond, that sacred connection to a celestial steed, no longer formed part of your essential identity as a paladin. Some players mourned this loss, feeling that the mount had been an iconic element of the paladin experience. Others appreciated the design decision, noting that mounted combat had been problematic in dungeons and urban environments, where horses struggled to navigate narrow corridors and tight spaces. 4th edition introduced Paragon Paths at 11th level, specialized directions your character could pursue. These functioned similarly to prestige classes, but were more tightly integrated into the leveling structure. Paragon Paths for Paladins included options that allowed further specialization in your chosen approach to holy war. The reaction to 4th edition Paladins varied wildly. Some players appreciated the tactical depth and mechanical balance. 4th edition Paladins were effective in combat, contributing meaningfully to group success without the complexity of managing dozens of different abilities. Others felt that something essential had been lost, that reducing the paladin to a defender role with power cards missed the point of what made the class special. The alignment restrictions felt toothless, without meaningful consequences. The removal of the mount seemed arbitrary. The standardization of all classes into similar structures eliminated the distinctiveness that had made paladins feel unique. The edition war, as the community conflict came to be known, raged for years. 4th edition supporters and detractors engaged in endless debates about game design philosophy, what Dungeons and Dragons should be, whether tactical combat or open-ended roleplay should take priority. Paladins became a flashpoint in these arguments, with traditional players pointing to the class as evidence that 4th edition had lost touch with the game's roots. While 4th edition advocates argued that the new Paladin was mechanically superior, and just as valid a representation of the holy warrior archetype. Then came 2014, and everything changed again. 5th edition, designed by Mike Mearls and Jeremy Crawford with extensive public playtesting, represented an attempt to bridge the divide, to create a version of Dungeons and Dragons that honored tradition while incorporating modern design sensibilities. The Player's Handbook was released on August 19th, 2014. The development team studied what had worked in previous editions, what had failed, what players actually wanted at their tables. They held public playtests, gathering feedback from thousands of participants, iterating on designs until they found approaches that satisfied diverse play styles and preferences. For you, opening the 5th edition Player's Handbook for the first time, the Paladin felt like a homecoming. The basic structure recalled 1st and 2nd edition. That sense of a warrior bound by sacred oath, gifted with divine power in recognition of unwavering commitment. But the mechanics reflected decades of design evolution, incorporating lessons learned through multiple editions. 5th edition Paladins begin without an alignment restriction. You can be any alignment when you start, though your oath, chosen at 3rd level, typically encourages certain ethical tendencies. This change acknowledged that forcing alignment at 1st level felt arbitrary, that a character should grow into their Paladin identity through the first 2 levels of play. At 3rd level, when you select your sacred oath, you commit to a specific code and gain abilities reflecting that commitment. This is when you truly become a Paladin in the traditional sense, when you swear the vows that will define your path forward. The Sacred Oath system became 5th edition's greatest innovation for Paladins. Instead of a single rigid code applying to all Paladins, you could choose from multiple oaths, each representing a different philosophy, a different approach to serving your ideals. The Player's Handbook initially included 3 oaths: devotion, ancients, and vengeance. Later supplements added conquest and redemption from Xanathar's Guide to everything in 2017. Crown from Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide in 2015, and Glory and Watchers from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in 2020. The Oath of Glory originally appeared in Mythic Odysseys of Thoros earlier in 2020, before being reprinted in Tasha's. The Oath of Devotion represents the traditional Paladin ideal most directly. You are the knight in shining armor, the champion of virtue, the warrior who upholds justice and righteousness. Your tenets emphasize honesty, courage, compassion, honor, and duty. You gain the ability to use your channel divinity to turn fiends and undead, or to surround yourself with an aura that prevents you from speaking lies. Your 7th level aura protects nearby allies against charm effects. Your 15th level feature makes you and nearby allies immune to charm. Your 20th level transformation allows you to manifest divine radiance, becoming an avatar of ideal virtue. The Oath of the Ancients draws from druidic traditions and Fey legends. You protect the beauty of the natural world, preserve the light against encroaching darkness, and stand as a guardian of joy and hope. Your tenets focus on kindling the light, sheltering the light, preserving your own light, and being the light in dark places. Your channel divinity options include ensnaring enemies in magical vines, or turning fiends and fey. Your auras resist spell damage and prevent undead and fiends from frightening your allies. At 20th level, you undergo an Elder Champion transformation, taking on characteristics of an ancient nature spirit, regenerating damage and recovering from grievous wounds. The Oath of Vengeance embraces a darker, more relentless approach. You are the hunter of the wicked, the executioner of evil, the warrior who pursues wrongdoers without mercy or rest. Your tenets prioritize fighting the greater evil, showing no mercy to the guilty, and aiding others while hunting your prey. Your channel divinity allows you to gain advantage on attacks against a single enemy for 1 minute, or to frighten enemies who fail saving throws. Your auras improve your mobility and that of nearby allies. At 20th level, your Avenging Angel transformation grants you a frightening presence and the ability to fly. The Oath of Conquest, from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, represents a more tyrannical interpretation of the Paladin ideal. You dominate enemies, break their will, and rule through strength and fear. Your tenets emphasize douse the flame of hope, rule with an iron fist, and strength above all. Your channel divinity frightens enemies or enhances your physical power. Your auras prevent frightened creatures from moving and deal psychic damage to those who start their turn near you while frightened. At 20th level, your Invincible Conqueror transformation makes you resistant to all damage and grants you an extra attack. The Oath of Redemption, also from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, takes an opposite approach to conquest. You believe even the wicked can be redeemed, that violence should be a last resort, and that wisdom guides action. Your tenets focus on peace, innocence, patience, and wisdom. Your channel divinity options include rebuking attackers with radiant damage, or taking damage meant for allies. Your auras reduce damage allies near you receive, and at higher levels, you gain resistance to all damage dealt by creatures. At 20th level, your Emissary of Redemption transformation imposes radiant damage on any creature that attacks you, encouraging them to find peaceful solutions. The Oath of Glory, from Mythic Odysseys of Thoros, and reprinted in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, emphasizes legendary heroism and inspiring greatness. You seek to become a living legend, to achieve deeds worthy of song and story. Your tenets involve actions over words, challenges as tests, honing the spirit, and disciplining the soul. Your channel divinity grants temporary hit points and enhanced mobility or advantage on athletics and acrobatics checks. Your auras grant you and nearby allies extra damage when hitting with weapons and enhanced movement speed. At 20th level, your glorious defense transformation allows you to turn missed attacks into hits and grants you additional reactions. The Oath of the Watchers from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything focuses on protecting the mortal world from extraplanar threats. You guard against invasions from other planes, whether demonic, celestial, or stranger entities. Your tenets emphasize vigilance, loyalty to the world, and discipline in facing the unknown. Your channel divinity options grant allies initiative bonuses and advantage on mental saving throws, or banish extraplanar creatures. Your auras grant you and nearby allies bonuses on initiative and resistance to spell damage. At 20th level, your mortal bulwark transformation gives you advantage on all attacks against aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, and fiends. And when you hit such creatures, they become banished on a failed save. The Oath of the Crown from Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide represents service to law, civilization, and rightful authority. You protect the social order, defend the innocent, and uphold the rule of law. Your tenets focus on law, loyalty, courage, and responsibility. Your channel divinity options compel enemies to duel you or grant allies temporary hit points. Your auras prevent allies from being forced away from you against their will and allow you to substitute your saving throw results for nearby allies. At 20th level, your exalted champion transformation makes you resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and your critical hits become automatic. Each oath transforms how you experience playing a paladin. The mechanical differences are significant, but more importantly, each oath encourages a different approach to storytelling and character development. An Oath of Devotion Paladin embodies classical heroism. An Oath of Vengeance Paladin might be grittier, more willing to make hard choices in pursuit of justice. An Oath of Redemption Paladin constantly seeks peaceful solutions. An Oath of Conquest Paladin dominates through force of will. These are not merely cosmetic differences. They represent fundamentally different philosophies about what it means to be a holy warrior. The flexibility of 5th edition's Sacred Oath system allows paladins to exist in diverse campaign settings without breaking internal logic. In the Forgotten Realms, you might swear your oath to a specific deity, becoming a paladin of Torm or Tyr or Ilmater, with your oath choice reflecting that god's portfolio. In Eberron, you serve the Silver Flame, but your specific oath defines how you interpret that service. In Greyhawk, You might follow Saint Cuthbert, or Erroneous, or Peller, with your oath showing which aspect of your deity's teachings you emphasize. In homebrew settings, your oath might stand independent of divine beings, a commitment to abstract principles rather than personified gods. The special mount returned in 5th edition, accessible through the Find Steed and Find Greater Steed spells. While not automatically granted as in earlier editions, these spells allow you to summon celestial steeds, maintaining that iconic image of the mounted paladin. The steed shares your bond, fighting alongside you and serving as a loyal companion. Some groups use optional rules, making the mount more permanent and significant, while others treat it as a useful but not essential tool. 5th edition also introduced the possibility of breaking your oath in a meaningful way without completely destroying your character. If you violate your oath's tenets egregiously, you might lose access to oath features temporarily or permanently. Some paladins who break their oaths become oath breakers, a dark variant presented in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Oath breakers gain abilities focused on controlling undead and harming living creatures, becoming something between a fallen paladin and a necromancer. The Oathbreaker option acknowledges that characters can fall, but provides a mechanical path for continuing to play rather than retiring the character entirely. The modularity of 5th edition classes means you can multi-class more easily than in some previous editions. Paladin-Warlock combinations became popular, representing characters who supplemented their divine power with pact magic. Paladin Sorcerer builds drew on Divine Soul or other bloodlines to enhance magical abilities. Paladin Bard combinations created inspiring champions who led through both word and deed. The mechanical synergies between classes allowed creative character concepts without the penalties that had made multi-classing paladins difficult in earlier editions. Contemporary storytelling featuring paladins has become more nuanced and complex than early depictions. Actual play shows like Critical Role, The Adventure Zone, and Dimension 20 feature paladin characters who struggle with faith, doubt, and moral ambiguity while remaining committed to their oaths. These portrayals demonstrate that paladins need not be simplistic or one-dimensional, that wrestling with difficult choices makes characters more compelling rather than less authentic. The online community around 5th edition has produced countless discussions about paladin philosophy, oath interpretation, and how to handle challenging situations. Players share stories of their paladins, celebrate heroic moments, and support each other through difficult role-playing decisions. The collaborative nature of modern gaming culture means you can find advice, inspiration, and fellowship from thousands of other paladin players worldwide. Across all these iterations, through every edition and revision, the Paladin has remained one of Dungeons and Dragons' most iconic and beloved classes. You are the holy warrior, the champion of justice, the knight who stands between innocence and evil. Your oath defines you, shapes you, gives meaning to your struggles. Whether you follow the classical oath of devotion, the nature-focused oath of the ancients, the relentless oath of vengeance, or any of the other sacred paths, you embody an ideal larger than yourself. You sacrifice personal freedom for sacred purpose. You accept restrictions others would reject. You commit to principles that guide your actions, even when convenient alternatives present themselves. The journey from that first entry in Supplement 1, Greyhawk, to the modern sacred oath system spans 50 years of game design, countless hours of play, and the shared imagination of millions of players. Through all those years, through all those changes, the core concept has endured. You are a Paladin. Your word is your bond. Your oath is your identity. And in a world of moral shadows and ethical compromises, you shine as a beacon of what could be, what should be, what must be if good is to triumph over evil. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Paladins in Dungeons and Dragons, please like and subscribe to Lore D&D. Your support helps me create more content, exploring the rich lore and fascinating history of our favorite game. Until next time, may your dice roll true and your oaths hold firm.